Good afternoon, or good day, good morning, whichever it is that you're watching this video. My name is John Tague. I'm the superintendent of schools for Franklin West Supervisory Union, which serves the students of Fairfax, Fletcher, and Georgia. And this video is to talk specifically to the Georgia community about the long-term weighted average daily membership, which abbreviated down below, LTWADM. So this is a calculation that is used to determine the tax rate. And if you haven't taking a look at the video that explains the funding system, pause this video, go back and watch that one, and then rejoin us. I'll sit right here and wait for you. Okay, good. You're back, or you didn't leave, but here we go with trying to understand the long-term weighted average daily membership. There we go. So there's a bunch of numbers that are associated with our understanding of the long-term average weighted daily membership. Say that 1,000 times and it'll start to just roll off your tongue. The first is the average daily membership, the ADM. And this is a measure that takes place over the course of 25 days of the number of students enrolled in our schools. So 839 was prior year, and the current year is 816.81. And you may ask, how do you get 0.81 of a student? This is based on enrollment. So if during that 25-day period, a student enrolled or unenrolled, you would get a partial. If they enroll in the school halfway through, you get a 0.5. If they enroll or unenroll after 19 days, you may get a 0.81. So this is pretty close to an actual number of student count. And in Georgia, this counts all students from pre-K through 12. So prior year was 839 was the average daily membership. The average daily membership for this current year, FY26, is 816.81. The prior year, we had 1.42 state placed students. You can see the breakdown of what our students, which ones were in EEE or pre-K, which the population of our elementary school, which is grades K through 5, population of our middle school, which is grades 6 through 8, and the population of high school students, secondary students, 222.32 students. We had a number of students at the federal poverty level, 224.9, one English language learner, and then as a measure of population density, which is a number that makes you eligible or not eligible for additional weighting as we move forward with this. So those are just some background numbers associated with the Georgia school. First thing they do is they calculate the long-term average daily membership, which just is the average from between the current year and the prior year. And so we average 816.81 and 839, and we get 827.91. To that, we add our prior year state place students, the 1.42, which brings us to 829.33 as our long-term average daily membership. This compares to the long-term average daily membership from the FY26 of 853.67. This year's is a lower number. That could be a number of factors. Students moving in and out of the district, could be that we had a larger graduating class than we brought in as a kindergarten class. So it's just a measure of the number of sort of beating hearts within the K-12 at Georgia. So then from that long-term average membership, we calculate the long-term weighted average daily membership. This is based on the idea that some students cost more to educate and should count as additional portions or whole students. So when we look at our elementary or our pre-K students or EEE, because preschool students are only in the building for 10 hours a day, they don't get a full weight. And so we end up subtracting 0.54 from each of those students. 83.52 students was our long-term average membership. So we are reduced by 45.1 in weights for our pre-K. Elementary students is sort of the baseline, so there's no added weight for elementary students. So the total added weight is 0 there. For our middle school, they presume takes about an extra 0.36 to educate them. And that comes partially because in middle school, you start to have maybe a math teacher, an English teacher, a science teacher, and a social studies teacher. So your staffing is expanded a little bit from what it might be in elementary school. Similarly for secondary, where you may have some additional either smaller courses, and so that's an additional 0.39. Then so if you compare to last year we had more pre-K students, so we lost a little slightly more number there. Our middle school students was about 7 higher, the count, so a little bit different weight there. And the high school students, again, about 11 less than last year, so a little less extra weight for those. Economic disadvantaged students, the adder for an economic disadvantaged student is 1.03. This year we had 224.9 students that were at or above the 185% of the federal poverty level. And so that adds an extra 231.64 weights to our count. Compare that to last year, there were 244.02 additional weights for our federal poverty level. So the thing to bear in mind is if a student moves in or out of the Georgia school district, and let's say it's a middle school student, that middle school student counts as one person for themselves. They count as an extra 0.36 because they're in middle school. And then if they're on the economically disadvantaged, it's an extra 1.03. So potentially a middle school student that moves in or out that might be economically disadvantaged counts as almost 2.4 students in our student count, which is, again, the measure of how we get to a tax rate. English language learners, we had one, they were additional 2.49. Again, special services required for students that are English language learners. These other calculations for sparsity, because Georgia's Georgia's sparsity is above 100, there's no extra weights for those, and Georgia's not a small school, so no extra weights for those. We take our extra weights, we add it to the average daily membership that we calculated on the last slide. And so the long-term weighted average daily membership in Georgia is 1,163.4 students. That's an important number because that's the number that we're going to use to determine our per pupil cost, which again goes on to determine the tax rate. Which we will get into in a future budget in a future video. This is the second in the series. I referenced the education funding system. You may go back and look at that one. Going to talk about class size, staffing ratios, Act 73, and your return on your investment. In the next video, we'll get into a budget overview video, and then how that ultimately, the tax calculation and the household impact in the last video in this series. Please remember that voting begins. You can vote as early as February 11th by contacting your town office. That means if you're going to be out of town or you have family members that'll be out of town, you can request an early ballot or an absentee ballot. We'll be holding the information meeting on Thursday, February 19th. That's earlier than usual, so just make sure you're aware of that. And voting day is Tuesday, March 3rd in the Georgia Gymnasium from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. with a town meeting presentation happening at 10 a.m. That's all for this video. I hope you took the time to look at it. If there's questions, please reach out to me or one of your board members, and happy to help you out. Thank you.